that your parenting decisions are based on you coming in a holy place yourself. Am I correct?
That's absolutely what it is. I mean, there was something about the market of parenting books that are out there, and that I also have, that fill my own bookshelf, and I'm sure many of us do as well. That
Recording
is.
In progress.
It's about solving problems. You know,
Our kids aren't listening to us. You know, they're not eating healthy enough food. There's sibling rivalry at home. All sorts of issues and problems. And at the core, all of these issues are issues and questions about what does it mean to be a human being. So
Yes.
There's kind of like a hubris that we could solve it with a script or or a 5-part plan, and it's just our deficit that we're not following through enough. So I found that there are so many of these books that they leave parents coming up short, and I wanted to write a book that says, I'm with you on the journey. I'm holding your hand alongside you. We all struggle. I struggle as well. And if we can have a book that asks more questions than answers and provides answers, then I think that we're just going to be in a much better place, in a much realer place, and that we can also come together and share, honestly, our struggles and our joys. It's the most amazing experience raising a family, and it's the most trying experience. And so if we're only in the place of, well, my kid's acing it because I followed this 5-part plan in the book, it's like, well, is that really true? What's going to happen when they go through that next developmental stage? So I think that I could only write a book that was honest, first about my own life and my own struggles and inner landscape, really as an invitation to share with other people, and to ask people to just walk the journey, I think, with me on this path.
Well, you really managed to, and in fact, as I was reading it, I felt I have wished that I had this book. My children are grown and flown, and what I noticed within it were many of the mistakes that I made by trying to align myself to this technique or that technique without really opening my heart to them. And you talked about that as a kind of an ego-based parenting versus a soul-based parenting. So that was something I was struggling with, and I didn't realize till much later, Darcy, that it was my ego and my need to control that I would present as, great righteous suggestions, but in fact, it was all about me. So can you talk about that whole, Parker Palmer, that whole sort of soul versus ego story, and explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was an exercise that AYECA, the Center for Soulful Education, that Aryeh Ben-David created. And I remember doing this exercise once, and it was 2 columns of our ego voices and our soul voices, and our ego stories and our soul stories. And it was so enlightening. And I realized in my work with parents and parenting groups that I wanted to bring that framework to just understand and to have more awareness of how we're acting, reacting, and behaving. And sometimes, especially in our social media culture, right? And Parker Palmer developed this idea from, he's a Quaker and an activist, an educator and a writer, and the founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal. And he writes, he writes about how every real interaction is a soul-to-soul interaction, right? It's like my inner soul connecting with your inner soul. And oftentimes we present ego to ego, how's my family doing? How's your family doing? How are your kids doing? Did they get into that program? My kid's successful at this. I got this raise at work, as opposed to the real stuff, which is, yeah, they're doing this, and it's where I'm really proud of them in so many ways. And they also struggle with that. And let me also share with you what's going really well for me, and also what's really keeping me up at night. And then what's keeping me up at night is the soul voice. And so I think that, we have to be careful, right? We can't have every soul interaction, then nothing's going to really get done in the world, right? But if we have more of it, and especially in our intimate spaces of community building, in synagogues, in trips to Israel, in, gatherings with our friends at our home, when we go ego to ego, we're left empty. When we speak soul to soul, and we open up those places of vulnerability and emotional risk, as Brene Brown talks about it, then we're just left with that feeling of, wow, I'm a part of something bigger. I'm a part of this human experience where we all fall and we all struggle to get back up and to continue to walk. That's really just what all of life is. So that's really some of that ego and soul piece.
It's beautiful. I was actually, as you were speaking at the beginning of it, I'm thinking she's talking about my rabbi, Brene Brown, the great rabbi of Texas. She's really something. I'm going to ask another question, and I don't want this to come across as though I'm somehow passing a judgment. God forbid I'm not. But what made you decide to use true stories from your own family as opposed to, less specific, stuff that happened outside? Was that part of your desire to speak a truth without shame?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's, I'll just share with you, the writing process was this. I became an early morning writer, so it would be, I'd get up at 5 and I would write, for an hour and a half. And what would I write about? I would write about the things that actually kept me up at night, right? I would write about the experience from the night before, or from that Shabbat, or, all of the things that were just real. And so I had a long document on my computer of just real stories and real life things. And there are a lot of things I didn't include, and there are many that I did include. But I felt that if I wrote parv stories, that were lessons of, I would just feel like, really, come on, what's the real stuff? And I went through a process with everyone in my family, definitely my husband and each of my 3 kids, and I read the sections of the book to them that I wanted, that I was planning to put into the book to get their permission to put it in. And my son said something beautiful. He said, Ima, you can include it because that's when things weren't going well, but now things are good. So yeah, you can tell people about that. So it was I was happy to do it. And I even interviewed him actually for the end of the book, but in the end I didn't include it, but I wanted to have their buy-in. And now they're very, really proud of the book. They look at it, they share it. They're not great readers. They're not in their 20s and reading, parenting books yet. But I hope that they'll see in it lessons that are just real. And even though they're specific to them and their character, they're not specific to them because they're generalizable. But unless I wrote from that honest, real first-person place of the real struggle and my real interest of what's the way through to this. And to be honest with you, after I wrote, I was a much more pleasant Ima at 6:30 or 7 in the morning around the breakfast table because I was able to kind of write about it and process it a little bit more as well.
Inadvertently, just by that explanation, you're touching on such an important Jewish principle, which is, we talk a lot at Momentum about the laws of speech, lashon hara, evil speech and stuff. And most people don't understand that you're not allowed to gossip about your children either, or use them as references. I mean, I've been called to task by my own children who have said, yeah, you're such a great speaker. All you do is stand up and tell stories about us. And I hadn't asked them permission. And it really brought me up short. So it's amazing that you got buy-in from your children. It's just a higher level of doing it. But again, as I said, one of the things, the book that I gave to this guy who was also struggling in his marriage, I don't think you can discount. You were very specific saying, maybe you don't have a partner, maybe you do, maybe your family looks like this, maybe it doesn't. But your wisdom about the interpersonal romantic relationship at the core of building a family was, I thought, a real added bonus, a gift. I think that book could be a marriage manual as well as a parenting book. So, yeah, just tell me a little bit.
Yeah, when I was writing it, and it was a comment actually a friend of mine made when she read an earlier draft, she said, I was waiting to just read a parenting book, and then suddenly there you are in your relationship, and I was thinking I wasn't ready for it. So there was a way that I realized in retrospect, because I write about couples, I also write about relationship with grandparents and that intergenerational connection, because I realized it's not just, it's almost like puritanical to see that it's just parents and children and that's it, or that it's a really modern phenomenon that we're disconnected. I'm the mother or I'm the father and I'm going to be focused on my kids alone, as opposed to it's the whole picture. It's it's the couple, if it's a couple who's raising a family together, it's the grandparents who are either in the picture or not in the picture. It's it's the home and how we're setting up our house and the structure of our home. And certainly there are many more chapters that could be written also about the community and friendship groups and all sorts of things. But it's that, it's the whole, it's a more holistic approach. And that's really what I wanted to bring across. And also this piece, I felt like it really carried through, the kernel of the relationship with the partner is that, that which is different helps you. That which is in opposition helps you. And, certainly not in its extreme, right? There's an extreme format of it, which is not true. But in this kind of like, this middle place, that if there is an other and an other way of doing things and an other perspective, it just enriches you. Who are you to think that I'm the mom and I know best and I'm with the kids in the afternoon, which happens to be the case in my family, that I would know everything. So I think that piece, that ezer kenegdo, right? The kenegdo is the ezer. The opposition or neged is.
Just for our viewers who may not be familiar with that wonderful term about how the Almighty created man and woman, can you just define ezer kenegdo?
Yes, it's the creation in the second creation story in Genesis. It's about, Adam was created, or the first human being was created. And then God was looking for a help meet against him, which is what it's called, that phrase, which is very awkward in English, and ezer kenegdo. And that was Eve, or, who was taken from Adam's side. So that phrase is a very rich phrase, and you can read it in lots of different ways, but I wanted to get to that place of not only in that primary relationship, us with our children, their opposition sometimes can be our help, right? It helps us grow to see, wow, you really see the world in a different way. The opposition of someone in politics can help me understand and see the world in a different way. They hold different values for me. So I just think that whole concept that we can really, while it's, first assigned to that initial primary relationship, I think we can expand it to really see how can we expand our spiritual capacity to see different and other as helpful in so many ways of speaking a bigger truth than what I narrowly from my particular angle can see right now.
Back to the ego thing, we're living in a time, obviously, where there is no nuance around that. There's no ability to tolerate, forget grow from, but even tolerate a difference of an opinion. And the algorithm of our social media doesn't even give it to us. We don't even get an opportunity. But I got to tell you, Jassy, the most painful parts in parenting, where my children were oppositional, pushed back, or caused me the worst pain I had ever felt, were the birthplace of my greatest growth, what I needed in this go around of my soul to correct my character. Now, in retrospect, I can tell you when your kids are older, you'll see it with crystal clear clarity. But while you're going through it, what kind of things might you say to yourself if you're feeling triggered? What do you say? Boy, does that child see the world differently than me? What's in this for me? What kind of meditations might you say to yourself to calm yourself down?
Yeah, well, I think that the first one is, and I have to say, it just happened today for me, and that I was thinking to myself, like, what's really happening here? And that's a question, like, what's underneath this behavior? What so like to get to that place of understanding and to so I mean, first of all is breathing, for sure, 100,000,000%, it's like breath is everything. And I like to say in some workshops that I lead that the nishima, your breath in Hebrew, nishima, expands your neshama, which is your soul, right? So every in-breath that you take expands your body physically and expands your soul capacity, which means it just slows you down and says, okay, why am I uniquely in this place right now to be uniquely in this situation, which with my child who's sitting next to me, with my partner, or with whomever. So I think that that's the first piece, is is just slowing down and breathing. And then the second one is to say, what's going on here? Like what's underneath this? And I'll just share that the interaction that I had this morning. I'm in the car with my son, and he's a budding teenager now. And I tell him, can you please, like, no phones in the car. I want to have this time with you. No phones in the car. So then he's on the phone in the car, and I'm getting more and more angry. And I'm about to stop the car and have this whole thing. And he's like, Ema, don't make a thing of it. And I'm like, okay. And then I said to him, I'm hurt because I really want to have time with you, and you're on your phone, and chaval, because I really want this time. And I realized that if I were in a fight with him, I'd lose, and it's not about that. It's just not about who's winning. You know what I mean? It's not.
It isn't? Okay. Sorry.
Yes, so like if we can drop down into that place of what's going on here, what are his needs? He's bored. This is what he does. What are my needs? My needs are to connect. And if I can then find that place to be able to express that and just be honest about it, nothing fancy about it, nothing whatever. You're not going to get a big punishment at home, and I'm going to take away your phone or stop paying for the what. You know what I mean? Like none of that ratcheting up thing that we all do, but just dropping down into the humanity of the situation. I want to connect. And you're bored, and so you want to be on your phone. And if I can find a way to express that to you, all the better.
Desi, you're spectacular. You really are. And it's never too late for me. I feel strongly that some of these things I can even put into practice with my older kids. This notion of Ayeka, which is probably the shortest, maybe one of the only questions that God asks of Adam and Eve in the Torah, in the whole Torah. Let's talk a little bit about that, because when you said to check in on yourself, what's going on here, it made me think of Ayeka. Where are you? So can you expand on that? Because one of the things you do so beautifully in your book is you take sophisticated Jewish concepts and you make them user-friendly. Because believe me, I'll be stealing so much of it from my lectures. I'll give you credit. This is about Ayeka.
Yeah, so Ayeka, is the first question in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah, and it's the question that God asks of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? When they do the wrong thing, when they don't listen to his guidance of you can eat from all of the fruit-bearing trees, just not that one. Don't eat from that tree, and they don't, and they eat from the tree, and then they're ashamed and they hide. And this question, Ayeka, is where are you? And Rav Kook says it's not, Rav Kook, who's the first chief rabbi of British mandated Palestine at the turn of last century, says, that Adam is looking for, it's not a location question. God knows where Adam is physically, but it's an existential question where Adam has lost his true I-ness. He messed up. He didn't heed what he knew to be the right thing. And I think that a lot of us are losing that ability to hear my Ayeka, my answer to Ayeka. Like, where am I in this? What do I need from this? What is my response to this? Not what everyone else is doing, not what it looks good like they're doing, and they seem to be successful, and their kids are turned out great, and whatever. But for me. So I think that turning inward and asking those questions, which I do throughout the book, because I want it to be a workbook, and it's not a book that you read in one go. I want you to read, take a chapter, reflect on some of the questions, one or two, whichever one triggers you in a good way, or resonates with you, and write your answer to it and return to it. But for us to kind of strengthen that muscle of asking ourselves, where am I? Having patience with ourselves, having patience with the situation. I say about parenting that this is the longest relationship of discovery of our lives forever. This is like a forever thing. You will always be the mother to your children. I will always be the mother to my children. There will be no other mother, in the picture of that first mother. So I think that it's really just practicing, getting into that practice of asking ourselves that question.
You know, when we ask ourselves that question, I think we can start to examine the things that trigger us in our children.
Mhm.
So this is a kind of odd question. It just occurred to me when you're speaking. Do you think that as adults, especially as adult women, that there's a role to seeing that book, your book, as a way to parent ourselves too?
Mm.
Maybe undo some of the behaviors that are just kind of familial and familiar, that we have to, in some ways, when we become parents, figure out how to go to our own souls, to parent ourselves so that we can parent our children properly?
I think that's such a beautiful question, and it has so many different levels. For some of us, we carry the image of motherhood with us so strongly from our own mothers. And I'll tell you, for mine, my mother passed away while I was writing the book, and she was a amazing mother and on every level to me, and I was just eager to like finish the book so she could read some advanced copies of it. And and so for me, I have such a high model to live up to in a certain way. And for others, there are people who have a more challenging relationship with their mothers, their fathers, and they're carrying that with them through the experience of parenting. And I think that this piece of becoming a soulful parent means that you have a unique soul, right? It came from God. It's yours. It's only yours. There is no other Adrienne in the world. There's no other Dasi in the world. There's no other anyone who's watching this, in the world. And of course, we inherit so much. And it's an inheritance, right? It's not a dictate. It's not a command. And so what do we do with that inheritance? How are we able to manage that inheritance, to unpack it, to question it when we want to get rid of some of it, to embrace and dwell in that inheritance. So I think that you're right, that process of asking a question, when it's asked openly and with a full heart, can be redemptive in a lot of ways. And that redemption sometimes is putting aside what we inherited, and sometimes it's really embracing it. But I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. I'm thinking about it.
Not as beautifully as you just articulated what I was trying to say and couldn't find the words for. This is why these circles, these momentum circles we're doing, are going to be so powerful, because they're kind of an intense deep dive into something, beyond your standard book club, white wine and cocktails and, plot, but to really dig deep into a subject that's relevant for all of us through the Jewish lens. And I believe that your book, first of all, I am going to register right away for the circle. I won't be facilitating it. I'm not one of the facilitators, one of the other triplators will, but I will be joining. And I want you to know, Dasi, my kids are 26 and 30. And I had, aha moment after aha moment. Because the truth is, you have small children, but it never stops being, as you just said, a role model, an example, and I still mess up in a big way. And I personally am grateful for this. I'm grateful for these momentum circles. What do you think of this idea of using this as a facilitated circle, this book? What do you think
I
of this?
love it. I'm so happy for it. I'm so happy for it because this is exactly how I imagined it being used. It's not right. So there's some book clubs which are about analyzing and unpacking and the consistency or lack of it. It's a critical lens that we sometimes bring to literature, which is great. And there's a place for it, and absolutely. This is a different kind of book, right? This is a book that's really kind of a letter, from one friend to another, from one parent to another, no matter what age we are, right? We're all in this together. And so if we can, use that letter as almost sharing it with each other and saying like, well, there are some interesting questions that are asked here. Let me go through a little bit of a process of writing about it, of sharing, my feelings about it with other people. I think it's just, I'm so happy for this partnership, and it's exactly the right home for this book.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm going to give you the last word here. We have like 30 seconds left. a little piece of wisdom, a message to the thousands of women around the world, Momentum Mothers around the world, who will be listening to our conversation and running to sign up for the circle, just your final kind of little gift of your brilliance.
I would say, I'm thinking about the end of the book where I write a love letter to all of you, to all of the readers, and I ask us all to love our children more and to really lean into that. And I know that for myself, sometimes I think like, I can't believe what's happening. I'm getting so angry and worked up. And to just always remember that our children are in need of our love and want our love, even when they sometimes push us away from it, and to always lean in and love your children more.
I can't imagine a better finale than that moment. Dasi, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Like really, this conversation has been so rich and beautiful. There's so many comments and questions, and I do hope you can join us again in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night.
Oh, and to all of you out there in Momentum Land, make sure you join us next week on Monday, the 15th of November at 8 p.m. for our next Momentum Boost, which is going to be with the former United Nations spokesperson and IDF soldier, David Kramer. From rescuing victims of natural disasters to going underground to help people suffering under hostile dictatorships, Israeli humanitarian efforts are everywhere, of course, largely overlooked or misconstrued too. And David Kramer is going to take us on a journey through Israel's life-saving work from 1948 until today, and into the compassionate lives of Israelis around the world. But right now, I would really appreciate it. Think about the poll that's right now. It helps us continue to provide relevant and meaningful programming. Your opinion, your point of view matters. But for now, from me, Adrienne Gould Davis, and from all of us at Momentum, please remember as we learn and grow and parent together that the highest form of wisdom will always be kindness. Good night.
Okay, thank you for listening with me. I'm having the same problem as yesterday. I don't know where the tab is that I opened the broadcast on, so let me see if I can find it. If I close one tab, do you think that'll let me open the HAP Studio back up? I'll let you listen to the news until I find it, okay? Because I can't close the broadcast until I find the broadcast.
Mandate. No cop, no firefighter, no nurse, nobody should be losing their jobs because of these jabs.
As some business owners protest.
We feel that it's an overreach of OSHA to get in between me and the employee.
Others have already adopted vaccine requirements.
We are about 21,000 crew members or employees. We're down now to, I think, under 300 people who have told us they don't plan to get vaccinated.
That is, COVID vaccinations are picking up for a new pool of Americans, children aged 5 to 11. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden visited school today in Virginia, hosting a vaccine clinic. It was also the first school to administer the polio vaccine back in 1954, a nod to this country's long history of requiring vaccines. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
And as Alice Barr mentioned there, the U.S. is now allowing international visitors again as the Biden administration lifts its pandemic travel ban. So if you have family living in another country, here's what you need to know. Foreign travelers can now fly into the U.S. if they are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. They're going to need to show proof of vaccination before boarding their flight. The new policy applies to more than 30 countries. This move comes as the U.S. has seen its COVID-19 outlook improve in just recent weeks. Even with pandemic
Okay, there's the
restrictions ending in
studio.
some places, some services still haven't returned to their pre-pandemic quality. According to the
They were
American
listening
Consumer Satisfaction Index,
to Momentum
customer
Boost. I'll put it in the chat on
satisfaction levels
Haps.
actually started falling
It's
3
also,
years
it's on
ago.
Facebook.
The pandemic accelerated that decline. It is now at its lowest level in 15 years. So at restaurants, customers are less satisfied with the service. And in turn, diners say they are less likely to return.
Okay, bye everybody.